Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with UFO updates in just a minute here. Before that, I did want to talk about our guest. He is Michael Hall. He has quite a background. He was a former Superior Court Judge Pro Tem, certified mediator, and he's also into UFOs, and we're going to be talking a lot about that. And he's out on the West Coast in near the Seattle area, Washington State, anyway. So I wanted to just say something really quickly here because a lot of times, I get, there's a lot of negative feedback on YouTube, and that's just the way it is. I understand that. And a lot of times I don't read any of the messages. So that's why sometimes I never respond. But sometimes I do read them, and I see some really good points that someone makes, and sometimes really good critiques, so I take it all. And I do want to, I got this really nice message, and I've always been, a little bit concerned about my professional life when it comes to UFOs and how they may cross. So I got this mail. I'm just going to read it to you because I thought it was really nice, and I really liked getting it. I'm a longtime listener to the Antiques Forum. That's my show. I do a podcast on antiques called the Antiques Auction Forum. And he writes here that he found my UFO show. And boy, was I surprised and skeptical. But I thought I'd listen to a couple of episodes as I hold you in high regard and believe you to be a straight-up guy. Anyway, the second episode I listened to was about the Nimitz case. And boy, I soon learned why you have an interest in this area. My views have changed quite a bit with such credible witnesses. So since then, I've listened to a few, and I've done my own Googling on the Nimitz case in particular. I really like the way you bring your logical antiques brain to the program and seek to find the truth and call out the fakes. That is healthy, as I, like many people, tend to lump everything together. Incidentally, I'm into boating, so we share a couple of interests, and now you can add UFOs to that. Anyway, he says a lot of really kind things. I just thought I'd add that to the show because I thought it was a very nice thing for someone to write, and also it's probably the first vindication that I really had that people are okay with me doing UFOs and antiques at the same time. Alejandro. So, nice letter, wasn't it? That was a nice note to get.
It's a great letter, and it's funny because you say it was vindication that people are okay with you. That's what's funny. He wasn't at first. He was thinking, "Oh, great, Martin, I like this guy," and turns out he's a UFO weirdo. But luckily, he liked you enough to listen to the show and saw there was credible stuff. So that's really cool. It's a great story.
Oh, by the way, he said I could say his name. He's Tony, and he's from Sydney, Australia.
From Australia.
Yes. Yeah. I have a lot of listeners, by the way. I'm sure you do, too. In Australia, a country of, 26 million people? It's like second.
A lot of people down there.
Yeah, like second or third as far as listeners to the show, which is great.
I would love to go out there, too, and visit sometime. Ben Hansen, our good buddy, goes out there and does talks out there.
Yeah.
Once a year.
It's a long
tour. That'd be fun.
Takes forever to get there, but I really want to go there in the winter. Winter here, summer there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So what's going on in the UFO world? Quite a bit, again.
A lot, as usual. Of course, the biggest story is this thing about storming Area 51.
Oh, yes.
So I wrote a story this weekend, and this isn't just to plug my story. Of course, it is largely about that, but also to talk about the details in the story. What I wrote was the people have gone past the warning signs at Area 51. And I put this on my blog at alejandrotrojas.com, but I actually wrote it for the Roswell Daily Record, so some form of it will go up there. But my point is, as I was writing the story this weekend, the clicker was at about 690,000. By the time I finished my story, it was up to about 710. Now it is at, if I saw right, 1.4 million. So it's doubled since just a couple days ago when I wrote my story. So this thing is really going up and up. And I actually contacted the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department. And here's why. If you read my story is about 3 different people who went across the line and what happened to them. And essentially what happens is the guards hold you until the police come because it's their jurisdiction. But you could be waiting there with your face in the dirt for a long time and you'll be manhandled and shoved in the dirt, until the police get there. The police had no comment. They said, we're aware of this, but we have no comment. However, the Air Force has told Washington Post, we're ready for it. You don't do it, and we're going to be ready if you try it. So, yeah, it's amazing that this is getting news all over the place. The question is, are people going to show up? Sure, it started as a hoax, apparently. In fact, if I look at the description for the event, all it says is, we will all meet up at the Area 51 Alien Center tourist attraction and coordinate our entry. If we Naruto run, we can move faster than their bullets. Let's see them alive. And Naruto's a cartoon, if for those of you who don't know, these kids training to be ninjas, so they run very fast and they dodge bullets. So even though this seemed to be a joke to begin with, with 1.4 million, I think people are going to show up. And what's scary is people like George Knapp or Nick Pope. I've retweeted their tweets saying, hey, this is a really dumb idea. George Knapp was funny. Hey, if you do it, it's going to make for a good story, that all right, because he's there in Las Vegas. But don't do it because it's dumb. And I was surprised at the number of negative responses they got where people are like, oh, you're just being negative. You just don't want us to find the truth.
Disinformation agent.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a host of people out there who I think are taking this seriously. So I hope that the authorities are ready, and we'll see what happens. I think it is a bad idea. And I think I'm really highly considering going just to cover what may or may not happen.
When I was on your show, yes, we talked on your show about this as well. And we were talking about the possibility of Facebook shutting that down, which I hope they do. But I was just thinking about this today. If Facebook did shut it down today, I bet something would still happen. You know what I mean? Because there's so many people involved.
It would still be a news story. And, of course, we were talking about shutting it down because essentially it's illegal. You can't storm Area 51. That's illegal. And so this post is advocating, and it's been essentially a real conspiracy to commit a crime with 1.4 million people at Area 51. So that's why we were speculating maybe they'll shut it down. They haven't yet, and I don't know that they will. Of course, they have a lot of time to do it. This event isn't planned until September 20th. So it'll be really interesting. I wonder how many of your listeners have clicked the going button. I clicked the interested button because I'm interested to see what happened. There's about 1.1 interested people, million interested people, 1.4 million say they're going. So, yeah, that's a big news story that's all over the place. But I'm really proud of my story because I've written this about these other people who've gone across, and some of it's pretty fun. And a couple of these stories that I posted have videos, so you can actually see what happens.
Yeah.
If you check that out. But yeah, that's a big story out there.
So what happens when you click on it that you're interested? Are you getting any notices or something like that through Facebook?
You know what? I haven't noticed that I've been getting any notices at all, to be honest. I thought maybe I would, but I'm not sure what kind of notices I would get. But I haven't been getting anything that I've noticed at all. Of course, I'm overwhelmed with notifications on and comments on so much other things going on
right.
Facebook that I could have missed it. But so far I haven't seen anything.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this will be really interesting how it plays out, and I just hope no one gets hurt, and no one really wants to spend time in the dirt.
Yeah, exactly. No one wants to spend time in the dirt, and it was funny because I told these stories, of course, when I was going with the Kardashians, Area 51. I got to take them. I told these stories to them on the way up to make sure they understood. Do not cross those lines.
Yeah.
And if you watch the show, they were really freaking out. They were telling their dad, at the time Bruce, now Caitlyn, don't cross. And he kind of tried to scare them. But, I would not want to experience that. But you were telling me about a listener. We were talking before we came on who was mentioning a Popular Mechanics story. And besides this Area 51 story, we've had a lot of very positive media talk about UFOs. And this Popular Mechanic one is a good one. It's the same, and I like it because I'm a fan of Popular Mechanics, but they've always been very negative. In fact, when I was back with MUFON, they wrote this really bad one. It was during the Stephenville years. It was terrible. But this article is pretty good. It's I don't know. It says 5 scientific reasons for believing in aliens, and I'm going to go over the 5 reasons real quick here. SETI Institute. I don't think this is a scientific reason for believing in aliens. It just means that these scientists believe in aliens. Yeah, and they're searching for aliens. So maybe, I guess, because these scientists do, that you should too. Number 2 is UFOs pique the Pentagon's interest. That doesn't mean you should believe in aliens, nor have they said they have scientific evidence of aliens, but it's still a great story, so I'm glad that they include it. 3, the Navy jet UFO encounters. Those, of course, are interesting. We've had witnesses on scientifically, so they're interesting. 4 is Oumuamua, which I don't think is alien at all. It's probably, just kind of some natural thing here. But that scientists were talking about aliens around it is interesting. And then 5, a plethora of exoplanets. And I think this is the best scientific case, just to show that there are way, way, way more planets out there than even the scientists expected. And of course, if our lonely little planet here that we know so well has life on it, then what are the chances that the millions and millions of other planets out there may have intelligent life as well? The odds are probably pretty good. So it is a great Popular Mechanics piece there. But otherwise, lots of other UFO news going on. If you want to know more about that, the headlines out there, of course, go to the front page of openminds.tv and you'll see them there in the headlines.
Wow. Hey, I just looked in chat. We have Kevin Day in chat and Chris Lambright. Wow, it's an all-star chat this evening.
Awesome.
How about that, huh?
Kevin's awesome. I can't wait to meet him at the UFO Congress. He's going to be speaking at the Congress.
That's right. That's right. Hey, Alejandro, thank you so much. And
yep, thank you.
And we'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.
All right. Talk to you next week.
And don't storm Area 51.
Yeah. No, don't plan on it, but I'll take pictures of the people who do.
Yeah. All right. Take care.
Maybe some video.
Yeah. All right. So our guest this evening is Michael Hall, and he is a former Superior Court Judge Pro Tem, certified mediator, a founding partner of the Hall Law Firm. Anyway, I'm going to skip all the way down to this part where he has a lifelong interest in UFOs, and we'll be talking about that and so much more. He's also part of the UFO I-Team. He just got back from some 4-day excursion. We're going to talk about that. And so, Michael, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Martin, I'm doing really well.
Good, good.
Turn my
need your camera
thing on here so
yeah.
I can see you.
Yeah, there you go.
How are you?
All right, great. Thanks a lot. Welcome to the show. And
I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, you're very welcome. And we're going to be talking about all kinds of things. For the person who is unaware of who you are, can you go ahead and give them the thumbnail description of what you do, how you got into this crazy subject of UFOs? Not so crazy anymore, though.
Yeah, isn't that something? Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, like most of us out there, I've been interested in UFOs my entire life, ever since I was a little kid. I think my professional career basically started back in 1974 or so when I was a field investigator for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, Coral and Jim Lorenzon's group back in those days. Also, over the years after I became attorney, I became representing a lot of ufologists, basically. Some of their setting up their programs for their corporate entities, and every once in a while there's some legal issues that come along. For instance, when Peter Davenport purchased his underground missile site in eastern Washington,
yes.
I was the guy who put that deal together for him. I've been Peter's attorney for the last 25 years and the National UFO Reporting Center. Also, Dr. Richard Haynes, the Pilot Reporting Agency, NARCAP, I've been their attorney since '99. I go back all the way to Dr. James Harder, representing him back in the old days. And
I've heard the name. I don't know much about him, but I have definitely heard the name.
Well, he was the lead scientist for APRO back in the 70s.
Mm.
He was the first guy to get a hold of Travis Walton actually and do an actual investigation and hypnosis regression with Travis initially after his 1975 sighting. So, yeah, it goes back a long way. Of course, I represent Grant Cameron with all these new breaking things that have been going on, on the Wilson memo and the Santilli, alien autopsy films and all that stuff. So I've been involved a long time, and basically I'm way beyond the point of do aliens or UFOs exist. We're trying to get down to the bottom line of what's behind the issues and what's behind the big push for disclosure right now, as we know in the mainstream media.
I've had a lot of people argue that point, and they're saying there's been a soft disclosure for a long time, and so what are your comeback from that statement?
Well, Grant Cameron would say that ever since he got into this thing about 40 years ago, that there are these programs of soft disclosure. They push something out, they pull it back, and then they push it out again. And matter of fact, a lot of the main players kind of morph from one organization to the other. There was the Avery back in the old days. Then, of course, the NIDS, organization came along with Robert Bigelow, and now the To the Stars Academy. It seems to be some of the same people involved throughout this whole disclosure process. But I'll tell you what, ever since that New York Times article, December 16th, 2017 came out, for some reason there was a massive agenda right now to red pill the public on the issue of UFOs. And eventually it's going to have to be the issue of aliens as well. So that's the fascinating thing. And I have, in my long career of over 40 years, studying this stuff pretty heavily, I've never seen this push at this point on mainstream media, on the History Channel, all sorts of television series and movies coming out to actually get people up to speed on these strange paranormal issues that we're all going to have to deal with if there's a huge paradigm shift happening and coming towards us.
One of the things, you mentioned aliens a couple of times there, and the one thing that I've seen, say, for instance, Lou Elizondo make perfectly clear is that he doesn't want to use the word aliens. It's just an unknown. And are you actually thinking that, I like to hear other people's opinions, but you have your thought is that you think that it is actually aliens that we're seeing, driving these craft, or there's all kinds of theories. Oh, yeah. You do?
Oh yeah, no, if we've got our Top Gun pilots out there, Luis Elizondo, Chris Mellon, everybody in ATIP are basically saying, well, we really don't know what these are, but we can't do what they do. There's no chance out there that the Soviets or the Chinese or some advanced civilization on our own planet is creating these craft that can do these things. So, I'm going towards the Wernher von Braun, prediction of the enemies out there that will be, gracing our borders here. Of course, first was the Russians. That was something that we needed to have during the Cold War and before. And then, of course, it was the terrorists were the next issue that Wernher von Braun brought up. Then, of course, there was rogue nations, just, various nations out there like, North Korea, whatever. And the last one, most notably, was the asteroids. That was kind of fun. I remember when they were pushing those a few years back. Then, of course, the last false flag or, enemy that we're going to have to fight is the aliens. So even though they're not talking about that, on ATIP and on Unidentified on the History Channel yet, they sure did give you the impression that there's some threat out there. And I think that's what they're going to be heading towards next is the evil alien agenda, which we need to be very discerning about.
Yeah. There's a lot of skepticism when it comes to what it is and theories. And, I had a professor on here, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks ago that had a theory that it's actually us from the distant future coming back, he had quite a background too, where he made quite a good case. I'm not saying that I believed him any more than anything else, but he actually made a really great case for time travel, as what we're seeing. And I think the reason, I'm sure the number one reason this comes up and different theories come up is because of the vast distances, that an alien would have to travel to get here. And of course, that they may figure out something in physics that we haven't thought of yet to get here. That's very possible. But it's all fascinating. But the way this, the one thing I always wonder about, if it is aliens and they are traveling here, if they want to go back to where they're from, how can they escape this time difference? In other words, when they come back, everyone they knew is gone, and maybe they figured a way around that too. Have you ever thought about that type of thing?
Well, yes, I have. As a matter of fact, this is real timely, given the fact that there's some interesting details listed in the 15-page Admiral Wilson Core Secrets document that has just been released. There's a spot in that document where they are claiming, basically, at least Admiral Wilson is telling Eric Davis, Dr. Eric Davis, who's interviewing him in this memo. He's telling him that he was told they have an actual working craft, a extraterrestrial craft that can travel through interstellar space, through our atmosphere, of course, underwater, he mentions in this memo, and through dimensions. This is a working craft that basically is being talked about by high government level J2 Joint Chiefs of Staff, in charge of all the intelligence companies or divisions of all the military, are talking about he is running across this information that these kinds of things transcend dimensions, let alone time. There's also a letter in this 15-page memo by Commander Will Miller, it's being sent to Dr. Davis, who claims that there is a scientist that is working on time travel, and he's got what they call the force theory of the universe. And so I think time travel is it's something that they've talked about, and probably someone has conquered already. I don't know about us coming back from the future, and being UFOs and trying to warn us of something or whatever like that. It's very interesting. You would think that if you're messing around with the past, if you go back into the time and want to mess around with the past or tweak the past, obviously there's multiple butterfly effects that could happen for your own future when you go back as well. So, that's a little skeptical for me.
I brought that up during, we have to go to break here in just a couple minutes, but I brought that up to this gentleman, this professor, and he had an answer for that too. I think he basically said that, no, once something has happened, it's happened in where you are, in the world you're in or whatever, and you can't change that, which I don't know. If one thing I didn't think to ask him is, if that was the case, then why would they bother coming back and saying, be good to your world, don't pollute and whatever it is you're saying, don't destroy the planet if nothing changes in their world. You know what I mean?
Good point.
Yeah. all these paradoxes, it's
exactly.
It's really fascinating. And so isn't what you mentioned about these the government officials and this craft that they're, I think it's the Navy patent, but these are all theories at this point, isn't that right?
Well, if you read the 15 pages of that Wilson memo, which I encourage everyone to do, you can go to Twitter and download it. You can load it anywhere if you just Google the term Admiral Wilson UFO memo or Core Secrets memo. Everyone should read it. It's very detailed, and the documents or the things that they're talking about in that specific part about a working craft is not a theory. He's talking about that they have a theory that these things could work. Admiral Wilson is telling Dr. Eric Davis that his understanding is that they have a working craft that can do these things. So there's a whole lot of interesting things in that memo that most people don't really have the opportunity to get into the details of it, because it's 15 pages long. It's mostly single-spaced, and it names dates and times and programs that are being run, unaccountably run, by the way. No government or military oversight by civilian subcontractors that work for the government. So I would encourage everyone to get into the details of that.
Okay, and I do want to when we come back from this break, I do want to point out a couple of arguments for that also. But let's go into break right now. This is Martin Willis, and my guest tonight is Michael Hall, and we'll be right back right after these messages.
Clear. 3 minutes, gentlemen.
3 minutes. Okay, thank you. So we're still live. We're still live on YouTube. And so I just going to start the timer right here. So I know we'll probably get back into this, when you and I are going back on the regular show. But I did want to ask you about the amount of sightings out in Washington. Now, I know, of course, 1947, the very famous starting out there is Mount Rainier, I believe.
Yeah, and actually we had even one before then. That
Really?
was the modern day UFO thing. 2 weeks before Mount Rainier, there was Maury Island. And I can tell you a little bit about
but
that too.
That's been pretty much proven a hoax, I believe.
No, it wasn't. It was actually proven that the guy said it was a hoax to get everybody off his back, but there was so many people involved with that thing that the issue. Matter of fact, I know the two guys that put together the Maury Island incident film. One of them is an attorney friend of mine, Steve Edmondson, and Scott Schaefer. Really good researchers and stuff, and they come up with the whole scenario of how that thing happened. And this guy's life was just ripped to shreds by the first men in black, by the way, that showed up, and threatened him and his family. And his son actually disappeared for 2 weeks, kidnapped his son, his 14-year-old kid. So you can imagine why he was pretty much done with the thing after the initial sighting. He said whatever they want him to say.
Well, I will. I'm going to have you school me a little bit more on that. We'll communicate through email, but I'd like to know more of why you think that's, that really happened. It's so confusing, isn't it, to know sometimes when I think a case is really solid, then I find out, whoops, there's so it's really hard. Well,
that's the whole thing with the Santilli alien autopsy film coming back and coming to the fro right now. This is just nuts. Some of those things have been recycled, and we get more and more, or maybe less and less information. You never know every time they come out.
Isn't this just? We only have a few seconds here left, but isn't this just a way for Santilli to make a little more money? I mean, this is what I would think right off the bat.
Well, I would think so, but I have another theory on that about, there were people that saw a very similar alien autopsy film earlier than 1995 when he created his. I think the Santilli film was maybe a disinformation, kind of like a Bob Emenegger problem, where they would show something being a hoax just to kind of, muddy the waters on people who actually saw some real footage earlier than 1995. So that's a fascinating story that we're involved with, Grant Cameron and myself right now.
20 seconds, gentlemen.
Okay, 20 seconds. That's good. Thank you. So we'll go back and we'll jump right back to where we were on this Wilson UFO document here when Bill brings us back on.
Great.
Ready here, Bill, whenever you are.
All right, I'll count you back in a sec.
All right.
Stand by in 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, welcome back. My guest is Michael Hall. And right before the break, we were talking about the Wilson UFO memo, they call it the leaked memo and all that. And I said I was going to argue, I don't mean really argue, but, discuss some of the things that I've heard about this in particular. One of them is I know that Wilson himself was called and he denied it, and I know, of course, that's a possibility of someone denying something, even if it's real or not. So I don't know how much credence that gives. But also, there's some question on the letterhead. What can you say about the letterhead was not correct? What do you think? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, the letterhead that you're referring to is the Commander Willard Miller wrote a letter to Dr. Eric Davis and kind of inquired as to whether they would want to have some contacts that they were looking for about alien, retrieved alien and back engineered alien hardware. And so in that letter, he uses a kind of like a letterhead that looks to be like some kind of an eagle with, a banner around it or something. The basic explanation of why people don't recognize that is because supposedly Commander Miller was retired at the time and was just basically using a personal letterhead that he put together, to send out letters. Other people, including Dr. Stephen Greer, by the way, who was at this initial briefing of Admiral Wilson in 1997, along with Edgar Mitchell and Willard Miller. Stephen Greer says that's a letterhead he recognizes himself from the retired Willard Miller. So that's kind of been, put to bed in that regard. It's not an actual government agency that's on that letterhead.
And what about Davis's his reaction to this whole document?
Well, it's very, very interesting because when you're talking about the definition of a core secret, and you put that in quotes when you're talking about something that is a military program or any kind of a thing that the military is working on, when they designate it a core secret, even the denial or the no comment regarding that subject can be a security breach. So basically the idea that if it's a core secret, you can't even really acknowledge it. So what happened with Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff, by the way, both of them responded to inquiries about whether this memo and the Willard Miller letter were true and correct. They both went on at length, basically, that said no comment. But they didn't say just no comment. They said, because of our security clearances that some of us still have, and they're talking about Hal Puthoff and Dr. Eric Davis and some of the other people that are involved in the NIDS organization currently, because of their current, classifications and clearances that they have, they can't even comment on this thing. So they couldn't come out and say vociferously they're denying that this is a fake. But they had to explain that in quite a few words, that they were just basically giving no comment.
So you're saying that they actually denied that this thing is a fake in a roundabout way? Is that what you're...
Well, some people are claiming that the fact that they didn't come out vociferously denying that this was a hoax, gives some kind of a credence to these things being potentially true and correct. But in reality, if you're actually looking at a classified, unacknowledged special access program that's a core secret, you can't even deny or get into the details of something being false and not representing a real program. So but they're craftily denying it in more than a few words, which kind of throws a red flag up for some folks.
I see. Now, I heard that an Australian UFO researcher had this document for, say, 10 years or something like that prior?
I wouldn't say it was that long, no. Matter of fact, Edgar Mitchell passed away, 94, I believe.
Edgar Mitchell? No, that was just
Edgar
a couple
Mitchell.
years. Just a couple of years ago.
Just a couple of years ago. So
yeah.
It was basically the theory is that these documents came from Dr. Edgar Mitchell's estate. Basically, I understand that his heirs, his family didn't really care about some of these issues that he had, put together in banker boxes worth of material. So one of the individuals that knew Edgar Mitchell got a hold of these boxes of documents. And then the gentleman that you're talking about from Australia, by the name of James Rigney, actually got a hold of one of these boxes of documents and was able to go through it, found the 15-page memo, and knew that this was quite important. So basically in November of 2018, just last year, he actually gave it to Grant Cameron. And Grant Cameron, when he found it, or when he saw it, basically told me that he went, his face went ashen. He couldn't believe that even on the first page of this document, noting the names and the details that are mentioned on there, Grant said that this was the most important document he has ever seen in ufology. And of course, Richard Dolan has called it the smoking gun UFO memo of the century. So that's how important this document was. So since 2018, and then Grant got a hold of me in 2019 because he needed to figure out what are we going to do with this document? What does he have as far as liability to, release this kind of a document to the public? And eventually, what we did in 2000, January or so, we actually formed a disclosure trust that I've created for whistleblowers specifically, to put documents and artifacts and various things into a state planning entity that they can control the access and the dissemination of, just in case something happened to Grant in the interim. Then, of course, what happened in June 7th on Twitter was the thing got actually released, not by Grant Cameron or myself, but actually an anonymous source released the document. And now everybody knows about it and has gone through it with a fine-tooth comb.
All right. When you say it was released anonymously, was it by a tweet? Is this how this thing was released and then linked as? I mean, can't someone search this out and figure out who it is that released it?
Yeah, good point. Because you would think that the really hotshot computer hackers out there could trace this down and figure out where it came from. So far, no one's been able to do that. Basically, it came from a site called Imgur, IMGUR. It was posted there initially, and also was posted on Reddit prior to that. Months back, I understand, it was on Reddit, and it was ignored, I understood.
Yeah.
But on June 6th, actually, it was actually posted again on Twitter, which basically hit the mainstream big time.
Okay, well, there's a lot of people that are saying that this is just a fake document. There's nothing to it. There's people saying that even if it's real, it's not that big of a deal. What's your thoughts about those comments?
Well, my comment would be that if this was a major disinformation program, basically if the government, for instance, was looking to muddy the waters with some kind of a document that would eventually be proven to be false, if I was in charge of that kind of a disinformation program, I sure would not come up with a 15-page transcript or memo, whatever you want to call it, with all the names of people who are living, by the way. Some of them passed away, but a lot of them are still living, and programs that could be cross-checked and make sure that they were still alive, available and working, and dates and times. I would not do that in such detail if I was going to make a disinformation campaign. It might be, a couple, 3 pages long, and I'd pick maybe 2 or 3 names that I could definitely control, whether they would come out and say, it's a hoax or whatever. But I'll tell you what, there are so many Pentagon and, government officials that are named in this document that can be searched out and determined if they're actually in the positions that they're talked about being in during this memo. There's also many other organizations like the people at NIDS, like Dr. Stephen Greer and Edgar Mitchell. There are remote viewers that are named. There's even another attorney that's named in this document, this 15-page memo, that has represented one of the remote viewers in the past. And boy, I tell you what, I have gotten many phone calls and emails into that gentleman. I'd like to be able to talk with him personally myself, just to see what he would know about the details that are in this memo itself. even Willard Miller, Commander Willard Miller, who has now come out and said that, this document, at least his letter part of the document, looks to be a cut and paste,
Yeah.
of something that he might have written or not written. I basically have confirmed through some of the other researchers out there that he actually remembers that he wrote some of that, and specifically he's talking about the initial paragraph of his letter where he's inviting Hal Puthoff and Dr. Davis to a scientific meeting in Tallahassee, Florida, to meet another scientist working on this time travel, and dimensional, issues and stuff. So he remembers writing that. He remembers, and actually the date and the time and the address on the letter is his home address. That's been confirmed as well. But some of the other things in the memo where they're saying that, if you want to get a hold of some of these people that are involved in the reverse engineering programs that the government has, Willard Miller is saying that he can hook up, Davis and Puthoff to those folks, as well as a bunch of other programs out there that, there was sightings on the East Coast of the United States that he was talking about. He could hook up with some flag rank officers that would know all about that. So it seems to me that there are some if I ever had an opportunity to cross-examine a witness that was supposedly written a letter like Commander Willard Miller did, I would ask him, what parts of this letter do you remember? And then find out, well, what parts there's something you don't remember, and why don't you remember those things? So very fascinating detail in this document.
And when was the date of that document?
This document was created in October 16th of 2002, when Dr. Eric Davis was able to get a meeting with Vice Admiral Thomas Ray Wilson. They met in the Admiral's staff car, the backseat of the staff car behind the EG&G building in Las Vegas, Nevada on that day. And Eric Davis, basically, as far as I can see, had some kind of a recording device recording all the details of their conversation for an hour and 10 minutes. That's the only explanation I can see of how detailed this memo is. I wouldn't think that someone from their own memory could reconstruct the actual dialogue that he does in this memo. And basically, it is the recollections of Admiral Wilson being shut down in 1997 from access to a reverse engineering program by a government civilian contractor who would not allow him to have access as J2, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Second in Command, who's in charge of all the subcontractors and all the military intelligence departments. They said he did not have a need to know what their program was about. Eventually, they told him and confirmed that they were a reverse engineering program of alien technology that was not of this world. Fascinating stuff.
Wow. And this, a lot of this sort of rings of the MJ12 documents. It's very similar in a lot of different ways. And it's going to be awful hard to convince. I think, to convince everyone in the UFO community that this thing is 100% right, or even if it's, partially right, there's that would kind of throw up a lot of red flags, and he's saying he remembers part of it. Well, that's interesting, but it would really, like you said, if you could bring this person into court and have them testify about it, maybe you'd get some more information. Have you actually yourself tried to get more information on this document by making contacts?
Oh, yes, for sure. And not just myself, but there's, a lot of the young guns out there as well. Frank Stalter and Jan Hanna and all those folks that are out there doing their best to dig deep and find out the veracity or the falsity of this document. There's a very interesting thing that is mentioned on the last page of this 15-page memo, by the way, that you brought up a very interesting point, that indeed there could be some disinformation in this document itself, because There's a gentleman by the name of Jacques Gansler, who is a friend of Admiral Wilson, who meets him at the Pentagon after this whole fiasco happens, and Admiral Wilson is asked to stand down and not pursue this anymore, or else he's going to lose a couple stars and be retired early. Jacques Gansler himself, a Pentagon official at the DOD, told Admiral Wilson that, yeah, UFOs exist. They're talking informally, but alien abductions don't exist. That is an interesting twist at the end of the document that really throws a kink into things for the UFO community, and you wonder what that information was in there for.
Wow, that is that is interesting. We have about 9 minutes to go to the last break we have in the show. And so for the person lazy like myself out there that I just skimmed through it a little bit, can you give some of the highlights and why you think it's really important?
Yeah, for sure. By the way, Martin, I realize that it is a lot to take in, because I've had this document under my perusal for over 6 months, and have gone through all the dates and details and organizations to vet them. So what I'm going to do is I'm writing a what I call an executive summary of this entire memo that will be available for people to really just kind of get a flow of the thing. So that should be a little easier for folks to handle. That will be up on the UFOI team Facebook page very shortly, and on YouTube as well. I'll get you a copy for sure. But there are so many things in this document that seem to ring true, including the basic idea that MJ-12 existed. They are talking about the fact that Admiral Wilson got confirmation from various people in the Pentagon and these subcontractors that a group that was either called MJ-12 or the Cabal or anything like that was in charge of alien crashed craft actually existed. So that was something that the Admiral is saying that he found out in this thing. Matter of fact, when he called these subcontractors to finally confront them with what they knew and why he didn't get briefed about the situation, they actually started spilling the beans a little bit about what was going on, and they could only go so far. And then they said, it's a core secret, Admiral, we can't tell you.
Interesting. So, and what are some other things that came up in, say, the conversations with Eric Davis, and that part of it that were, that the listener interested in UFOs would like to hear?
Well, there's all sorts of details in that document about the idea that there were a crash at Roswell, New Mexico. Not only that MJ-12 existed, but the crash at Roswell, New Mexico happened. The retrieve technology is being studied by these reverse engineering programs that are run by civilian contractors. There's the whole idea that there was something called a bigot list of need-to-know people that each of these organizations keep. And unless you're on their bigot list, which is BIGOT, and it sounds very racist, but it's basically an anachronism backwards that stands for To Gibraltar, which was a code name used during the World War II invasion at Normandy to start planning that event. And they ended up using the reverse of that instead of To Gibraltar, To Jet Bigot, backwards, as a code name of anybody who has a need to know for a specific unacknowledged special access program. So when the Admiral met with this civilian contractor, they showed him their bigot list, and he was not on it. There were no U.S. presidents, no White House personnel, no congressional personnel, no military personnel on this list. Only a few Pentagon employee officials that oversee the program. So those are very fascinating conversations that Eric Davis was having with Admiral Wilson about the details of these programs. And basically this was one program dealing with one reverse engineering aspect of the whole phenomena. So you never know how many others are out there.
Interesting. Well, you know how long ago Roswell was, and if they brought forward some type of craft gear and they were reverse engineering it. That's a long time. That's, what is that, 70, years?
72.
And how could they possibly keep that, quiet? First of all, how could they keep that quiet? And if it's in, I'm talking specifically, if it is in the hands of a private, which I actually would agree that is a great way to, to hide, keep out of Congress and, anything else, is to get it in the private sector. But how could this be grandfathered from, it's generational at this point. So how could something like this make it through generations of, say, reverse engineering or, a company, working on trying to discover what these things are and how they work? We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay, well, that's the whole Bob Lazar story right there in a nutshell, which is kind of strange. Bob Lazar they come out with a movie about Bob Lazar just very recently, and this memo comes out shortly thereafter, basically confirming the idea that these civilian back engineering or whatever programs that we've got working for the military are really hamstrung themselves. In the memo, it's mentioning the fact that they have very slow progress in reverse engineering these special projects, and they are stuck using basically the personnel that are only on their bigot lists. They can't access the wide range of scientific consultants out there in the world that could help them, and they can only use their own facilities due to the stovepiping and the secret things that they have to keep, depending on their budgets too. So it kind of goes on for decades from what this memo is saying, with very slow progress, which is kind of flies in the fact of there could be also a reverse or a secret space program that's already doing all this stuff. So we almost have like two things going on at the same time, and you never know which ones are the correct versions of reality out there.
We're going to be taking calls in an hour or two, but I just happened to notice, and I can't really pay attention to chat too much, but I noticed a question from a Jay Allen. He wanted to know which remote viewer is mentioned in the memo. It was two women, and I don't have the memo off the top of my head, but I'll tell you who it was. It was the woman who actually channeled an alien at the, I think it was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and she was meeting with some of the high brass there that she had convinced that she could do this. And in reality, what she did is she actually made an arrangement for one of the actual officers that were there to become a channeler himself, and an alien craft showed up outside their window at Wright-Patterson to do that. Forget her name off the top of my head, but she's one of them. Very famous incident that's been written about in ufology over the years. Oh, okay. All right. So a lot of people know, my longtime listeners know, that I'm sort of skeptical about certain things. And so a lot of things we're talking about tonight, I'm sort of skeptical about. I'm letting you talk. You're making a good case for things. But I will have to tell you that Bob Lazar is on my skeptical list. And a lot of people are not happy about that. But I'm still, I personally think that, Jeremy did a good job with the movie he did. But I still think that I was trying to be convinced to believe the whole thing. And I also watched the Joe Rogan Bob Lazar interview, the whole thing. It was 2 hours. And the more I watch, the less I believe, and the less I believe him. And it's not a popular view, but it's just a feeling, a gut feeling I have. Maybe as an appraiser, really looking into things and watching people and stuff. But anyway, I'm not saying I'm an expert on people, but it just, my thoughts are still that I don't really buy it 100%. However, I do agree that a lot of really interesting things have come about because of what Bob Lazar has said. So I will give him that. And at this point, though, we are about ready to go into break. So my guest tonight is Michael Hall, and we will be right back right after these messages. is Michael Hall, and I'm back with him. And Michael, so this has been an interesting night. And, I just kind of, I don't know, would you say I slammed Bob Lazar? But I gave my opinion on Bob Lazar. And, but anyway, I have to be open-minded and say that I could be totally wrong. Perhaps there is something to his story all the way through. When there's bits and pieces that don't ring true, that always gets me wondering. And you, as a prosecutor, were you a prosecutor?
I was. I clerked in the prosecutor's office, but I ended up not going with the program being a prosecutor. I just went into private practice.
I see. But how do you feel that helps in what you're doing here when you're looking at a story, whether it's a false story or a true story? How do you feel that helps you?
Well, it does. It's a mindset that you get in as a lawyer. The first thing that you learn in law school is that everyone deserves a defense of some kind if they're in a legal issue, whether it's criminal or civil. So you end up having a point of view that is forced to be either pro or against a certain issue, depending on which side of the case that you're on. And you end up having to develop skills to be both a defense attorney and a prosecutor to get down to the truth and veracity of the story. And then, of course, if you're lucky enough to be appointed to the bench and become a judge, it is just awesome. A responsibility and an incredible opportunity to basically understand that you're going to hear testimony that doesn't quite make sense sometimes, that will turn out to be true and correct. You'll hear testimony that rings so true to yourself and the jury, and you find out later it's totally false. So basically the idea being is that you keep an open mind, you keep digging for the details to make sure that either the standard of care in the law is beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the criminal standard. That's way harder to prove than just a preponderance of the evidence, which is basically 51% sounds like it could be true, 49% maybe it sounds like it's false, but it's still going to be ruled as being true if you're going for the preponderance of the evidence standard. So when you have those different standards out there, you bring that to ufology and you go, well, wait a minute here. This isn't a slam dunk either way. You just keep digging for information and you put it out, the information to the public, and basically slowly but surely you're getting towards the truth of the matter.
I see. All right. So using this skill, let's just say that you were on the other side of this Wilson UFO document. You were on the side where you thought it was false. What would your arguments be? In other words, what's the weakest part of this whole thing?
Well, one of the weakest parts of the entire issue is how it was released. There are two different releases that you got to worry about. How it was actually obtained from the Edgar Mitchell estate, for once, because there is an individual that is still unnamed out there, by the way, who was the original beneficiary of these documents. We don't know who that is at this point. At one point, James Rigney actually contacted that person, was actually able to go through a few of the boxes and found the smoking gun memo. So that's the provenance issue that needs to be looked at. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there is the issue of who actually released this document on Amger and Twitter. If that could be found out to be, for instance, one of my theories on this other side of the fence that you're talking about, Martin, is that this document has been wanting to be released for maybe a few years. Actually, Richard Dolan has mentioned that back in 2007, he saw this document. He at least saw 2 pages because he remembers the part that it says this retrieved technology was not of this earth, not made by human hands. That stuck in his brain over the last few years. So if indeed this document was slowly being, pushed out into the public, and then finally, since Grant Cameron was not releasing it on time or a timely basis of what they thought was going to be released, someone actually released it themselves on Twitter. If that could be determined, it would be very interesting to see who's behind the actual leaking of this document. Whether it's true or correct, the actual leaking of the document could sure tell us a whole lot.
Now, where did Grant get this copy?
Yeah, Grant, speaks all over the world. He's been my client for many years, and he tells me that he was at a conference, a major conference here in the United States, when he gets approached just as he's leaving town to go to another conference by James Rigney, an Australian, had this document and wanted to show him what he had. He eventually showed it to him, and Grant said, "Where did you get this?"
And so then how does that tie in with Edgar Mitchell then?
Well, the whole theory is that Edgar Mitchell, these documents, not only the Admiral Wilson document, but the Santilli emails thread from Kit Green, confirming to Robert Bigelow that he thinks this alien autopsy film is a genuine autopsy or representation of an autopsy of a real alien. They seem to come from Edgar Mitchell's documents of his estate, and the reason they believe that is that, see, Edgar Mitchell was on the board of directors of of NIDS, Robert Bigelow's group, and there is a couple letters from Robert Bigelow to Edgar Mitchell confirming his, being on the board of directors and the meetings that he's attending, and the fact that Eric Davis, Dr. Eric Davis, was also on the board of directors of NIDS. The idea being that this memo and these threads from Kit Green about the alien autopsy all ended up in Edgar Mitchell's paperwork as a member of the board of directors of NIDS. So everyone assumes that other board of directors of this organization would have similar documents that corroborate these coming from Edgar Mitchell's estate as well.
Well, I have thought about this as well a little bit, and I would just think that someone like Edgar Mitchell is going to get a lot of documents, a lot of, maybe MJ12 documents, maybe a bunch of other things sent to him because he's such a high-profile person. What was he, the sixth man on the moon or something? I can't remember. But I mean,
yep.
he walked on the moon. He's a real important astronaut, and he had thoughts that there was really something to the UFO subject. He's going to get a lot of stuff in the mail, whether it's sent to him physically or email or whatever. That he's going to get a lot. I don't know if that, to myself, I don't know how much credence that adds to this document that it came from his estate because of that, in particular. And let me just ask you this: what kind of backlash have you had from the UFO community or Grant or Richard Dolan about this document being fake? How much of a backlash has there been?
Well, initially there was obviously the basic ufology kind of like arguments of well, how do we know it's real? How do you prove the veracity of the document itself? But then Richard Dolan came out very shortly, right after the document was leaked on Twitter, and did a fantastic analysis, by the way, of the entire document and why he believes that is indeed the most important smoking gun memo in ufology in this century. And I think more, of course, if it's true and correct. So basically the whole idea that more and more people got into the details of the document. And I had it again, like I said, over 6 months going through the details, doing the vetting and the following up on the various things that are mentioned in there to see if I could find any glitches in the document or falsity in the time frames and those kinds of things, and I couldn't find any. So when you have major ufologists like Grant Cameron, who says basically that he's never seen anything like this before, even if it was. Matter of fact, Grant is very discerning when it comes to this slow disclosure, this managed disclosure where they have plausible deniability and they pull it back later. And this is totally different and unique in his experience as well. So it is very interesting. And if it is indeed a hoax, it is the most bold hoax you've ever seen in ufology, with all the details included in it.
I'm kind of, maybe I'm beating a dead horse a little bit here, but what are the arguments that you're hearing the most of? Why are so many people saying that this is, a fake and there's nothing to it? And what is the grounds that they're standing on that you're seeing out there?
Well, okay, there's a few good points, obviously, but one point is, can anybody really place Admiral Wilson in Las Vegas, Nevada, on October 16th, 2002? That would be one issue that we could actually confirm that, he was in the neck of the woods there to be meeting with Dr. Eric Davis at the EG&G building in Vegas at that time. So that's an issue that still needs to be pursued, whether there's some kind of a log or some kind of a diary that can be prove that he was there that day. There was also the issue of, all the details that are included in this thing and whether anybody could corroborate or come forth in public and confirm any of the details. The only real details that can be confirmed and has been by participants in this memo comes from Dr. Stephen Greer himself, who was actually at the briefing with Admiral Wilson and Edgar Mitchell and Commander Miller as well. And he was just recently interviewed on Jimmy Church and other shows, confirming that, he wrote about this in his own book shortly after the actual 1997 briefing that he did, and confirmed that these things that they talked about for well over 2.5 hours in the briefing that was only supposed to last 45 minutes, by the way, about the retrieved technologies, the Roswell crash, the MJ-12 documents. He confirms, Dr. Greer does, that those things happened as well. But of course, you've got all sorts of other details in the document, like the fact that UFOs do exist. Jacques Gansler says, but alien abductions don't exist. A lot of people use that as something that's totally bogus, they understand, in ufology, and proves to the falsity of the document as well. There's a whole lot of things that go back and forth, pro and con, on the document.
I see. Well, that's going to be no matter what, but it'll be interesting to see how this thing plays out. Maybe it won't play out. If you look at the MJ-12 documents, there's a number of people out there that really believe that they're 100% real. Stan Friedman, thought some of the documents, after all his many, many hours of research, he thought some of them were okay. And I did mention to him as an appraiser, if I find a fake fake painting and a bunch of real paintings, I'm skeptical about them all. You have to really, really dig and dig. So just as a question to you, what did you think about the MJ-12 documents?
The MJ-12 documents are, I think Stanton Friedman was correct in his analysis. I think there were, some maybe disinformation given to Jamie Chandray and, at that point. But I think the overall idea of the organization that was put together supposedly by Truman, right after the Roswell crash, supposedly in 1947, it seems to be very true and correct to me when you look at other resources. There was an interesting aspect to that story also. When Stanton died just recently, Grant Cameron was able to actually access his FBI file. I don't know if you've heard some of Grant's information that we found out that the FBI had quite an extensive file on that the idea that Stanton Friedman had supposedly an alias even that's blocked out in these documents.
Wow.
We don't know what that alias was, because they're blocked out by, they don't use black paper anymore. There's a white paper that they block out certain things in the document. But the real interesting aspect of the FBI document shows that Stanton Friedman, very early on in the 60s, had access to the actual FBI file numbers that he was requesting on Freedom of Information requests. And the FBI got very suspicious about the fact that he knew all the details of the actual file numbers he was requesting. And so they opened up the file on Stanton Friedman shortly after he got out of school, out in college, when he was doing his research on UFOs. So you never know how close Stanton Friedman was in knowing what the inside information was. And if he was that close, the fact that he believed the MJ-12 documents were true and correct goes a long way with me anyway.
Interesting. So one of the, anyway, I'm going to open the lines for anyone that wants to call in about this document before we move on to another subject. But Jay Allen has another question. It basically is, what is the chain of custody? You sort of followed that, but that is really important when it comes to something like this, the chain of custody, the provenance, so to speak, of this Wilson document. And that's what I see right now myself as kind of the weakest part of this is, you got to know where it came from, as far back as you can, and that's a problem, or that can be an issue.
Yeah, there's the basic missing link in the chain of provenance at this point is how, if indeed these are from Edgar Mitchell's estate, how they actually got from Edgar Mitchell to the gentleman who received the banker boxes of information from his family. We know how James Rigney received the information from this undisclosed source. So that provenance has been told by Mr. Rigney himself. And then, of course, we know how those documents that he had were given to Grant Cameron. And I can verify that I got the document from Grant on January 2nd of this year. So I've been sitting on them for a long period of time, vetting them as well. So I have heard the new information I'm hearing is that the original source of the documents from the Edgar Mitchell estate might be coming forth, him or herself, very shortly, and confirming how he or she received these documents from Edgar Mitchell's family. That would basically kind of add, veracity to the chain of evidence of where these things actually came from. And the fact that basically at that point, James Rigney would have all the confidence in the world that the documents that he received from this source were true and correct as well. So that's where we are at this point.
Yeah, that would corroborate, they would need some more corroboration, and the family, I'm sure, does not want to get involved at this point. I don't know.
That's my understanding, right?
Yeah.
And then the other issues are, by the way, that there are additional documents in this Edgar Mitchell estate. If, for instance, we can confirm the existence of these other documents that are maybe around the same time frame, they're from the same actors, they're from the same people and organizations that he was involved with, Edgar Mitchell, with NIDS and, To the Stars Academy, folks and all this kind of thing. Those would show more provenance as well, that the original document, if they were coming from the same source, same boxes, Edgar Mitchell's estate, would kind of make sense as well.
Now, are you saying that he obtained, Edgar Mitchell possibly obtained this through NIDS because he was involved in NIDS? Is that what you said?
That's right. That's the basic premise of the whole idea that not just one, a banker box is a big old box you keep all sorts of files in and stuff. Multiple banker boxes is what I have been hearing from Edgar Mitchell's estate were almost thrown away by his family. They were retrieved by this source that we don't know who he is at this point, or she is. and then leaked out slowly. So if indeed we've got multiple boxes of documents that are about the same thing or from the NIDS organization, about NIDS meetings, we've got some documents that are actually from Robert Bigelow to Edgar Mitchell, talking about the upcoming meetings that he's going to attend and those kinds of things. So it basically ties him into the board of directors or consultants, basically, that he was on for NIDS. That's basically where we're thinking a lot of these documents came from.
Would there be any reason why Edgar Mitchell would not have released any part of this document during his lifetime?
The only thing that I can think of is, being a naval officer himself, an astronaut on the inside, he would obviously know the repercussions of releasing core secrets or any kind of document that would be classified, those kinds of things. Although the 15-page memo is not a classified document and not a core secret, but it mentions core secrets. So I would assume, and I'm wondering, because I often wonder about this, when people pass away on their deathbed, they might say something to their children or their family members. That's why I created this idea of a disclosure trust for people to actually put these documents into a trust that they name a successor trustee that's in charge of disclosing the information either upon their death or sometime in the future, even during their lifetime if they would like. But the idea of creating an estate planning tool to preserve these documents is something I've always been interested in doing in my 30 years as a career as an attorney. So I still am hoping that there are other people out there that got corroborative documentation about some of these meetings and issues that might be able to corroborate what's in the 15-page memo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll just have to see what plays out in time. And I was hoping to get a call or two, about this document before we moved on, but that's okay. So the Mount Adams incident.
Yes.
I know you did. You were involved in speaking about that. Can you tell us what that is? I don't even know if I'm familiar with that. I might catch on once you start, but go ahead and talk about that if you would.
Well, yeah, thanks, Martin. The UFOI team that I founded and direct is a group of highly sophisticated and educated field investigators of UFOs, paranormal, Bigfoot, and all those kinds of things. And we typically go out in various expeditions during the years, during the summer a lot, but all year long. And one of our last ones this past weekend was at Mount Baker, Washington, which is high in the North Cascades, almost at the Canadian border. Matter of fact, right next to the border, there was a group of 7 mountains called the Pleiades that can be seen from the foothills of Mount Baker that we take our sophisticated gear with us, night vision photography, FLIR photography, stop action and, video and all that kind of stuff. And we record anomalous aerial activity all the time in that general neck of the woods. Mount Baker is just in a very unique place in the fact that it's about, Mount Baker itself is about 10,000 feet. This location that we basically go to is called Artist Point, which is a beautiful view north across the Canadian border to the Pleiades and the other Mount Shuksan and other peaks in the area. And we don't hardly ever go up to that expedition at Mount Baker and get skunked as far as our recording UFOs on tape and being able to analyze, what we're seeing. There seems to be at least one group of UFOs that we see periodically that kind of disappear into the mountain. They almost look like they could be shooting stars. You would see a white streak of light coming down at various different angles, but they seem to be going almost like a magnetic anomaly into the mountain from different parts of the sky. That's been very unique for us to figure out why these, if they are shooting stars, why are they being drawn towards one location on an area in Mount Baker, and not just seeing streaking across the sky horizontally or in different directions? So that's interesting. We also have a local member of our group up there in the small little town of Glacier, Washington, who is able to set up a very inexpensive Nikon Coolpix video camera on a tripod, and he takes videos that are only like a minute, 2 minutes long at 49 frames per second, like a normal video camera of that size would take. Then he runs it through his laptop computer frame by frame, and he is capturing in daytime, by the way, anomalous craft traveling through his field of vision in 3 frames. Now, when you do the math on 49 frames per second in a short video, and you realize that an object is traveling through the field of view in 3 frames, it's well over 20,000 miles an hour that these things are traveling. They're, triangle shapes, they're V shapes, they're saucer shapes. And basically, these things are going so fast you cannot see them with your naked eye unless you have the ability to go frame by frame and do the analysis on the videos. So we've even recorded those things going from the sky down to the water in a lake up there called Silver Lake, and recorded them going under the water and not even slowing down, not even making a splash, coming out of the water and shooting into the sky with on videotape as you go through it frame by frame. That's how anomalous aircraft is being sighted all the time in just that one area in the state of Washington.
Isn't that something? So, I've thought a lot about the way technology is changing, changing things especially as far as when you're talking about being able to see things in different scales or whatever that you haven't, no one has seen before. And so a lot of that, as technology grows, I think we're going to see more and more,
Oh, yeah.
But wasn't...
Matter of fact, there is
Go
an
ahead.
interesting aspect to that, Martin, that you just brought up where, Kevin Day and Gary Voorhees and these guys on the Princeton and the Nimitz aircraft carrier group, they mentioned the fact that all of a sudden when they got an upgrade to the Super Spy 1 radar system, that's when they started seeing the Tic Tac UFOs in flights of 5 to 10 at a time over a 10-day period up there. So it's the idea that technology is now kind of coming into the field that will allow us to see these things that maybe have always been there. Have you heard about the new project that they are working on to go back to Catalina Island and see if they can find those Tic Tac flights again?
No,
I can tell you,
I have not heard this.
I'm hoping that Kevin Day won't jump on me for disclosing this at this point.
Oh, is that might be what he said in the chat room a little bit earlier, that he had something to to come out
there
with.
It is.
That's it.
Well, I've been very fortunate to be working with Kevin and the gang, at the Nimitz UFO encounter, because what they have found out, by the way, is that for some reason that flight of, or the multiple flights of Tic Tac UFOs seems to have corresponded with the actual whale migrations that were going on at the exact same time in November in 2004 when these things were being sighted. So they have put together a project proposal through New York University, being funded by crowdfunding and other kinds of sources, of an expedition. They're actually going back out to Catalina Island in that area during November, and they are going to try to find out if there's any correlation between the Scripps Institute data of whale migrations and the fact that the UFOs seem to be coming potentially from an underground base off of Catalina Island, following the whale migrations for some reason, and then disappearing again in the water in off of Mexico and the islands down there. The theory being that if, for instance, these whales are sentient beings maybe there is either a correlation with UFOs and the communication they are having with whales, and or just the UFOs are studying the whales and their migrations as well. So that's a fascinating project that they're coming up with. They call it UAP Expedition.
How about that?
They're coming up with.
Well, maybe the whales are studying the UFOs. How do we know?
Wouldn't I like the way you think? Yeah, now you're talking. Matter of fact, maybe the whales are the ones in charge here on the planet, and they're just like, dealing with these guys that are coming to visit. You know?
And the whales are going to kill us all. Yes. All right. So interesting. No, I didn't know that. But I thought I read in your bio somewhere about the Mount Adams incident. Did I get that wrong?
No, you're right on there.
Oh,
you got a great
phew.
memory.
All right. I thought you were talking about Mount Baker, and I thought, oh no, I got the wrong mountain. So what is what is the Mount Adams incident?
Well, the Mount Adams incident is Mount Adams, Washington, which is almost in Oregon, by the way, the southern part of the state, almost south central Washington state. Another main mountain in the chain from Mount St. Helens, Mount Rainier, Mount Baker. The Cascade Mountain Range goes through the entire state. But the Mount Adams incident was just a strange thing. Down at Mount Adams, there is the ECETI Ranch run by James Gilliland. And if you've ever received any information or gone to visit in ECETI, you were pretty much guaranteed to see some anomalous aerial activity down there. Jimmy Church has recorded some stuff on tape. There's been some very interesting studies done about the UFOs that seem to be coming out of the mountain and going across that area. So we did last year expedition down to Mount Adams as well. We ran into the first major thing was a huge white glowing object below the cloud level, by the way, of about 2,000 feet. This was like a light that was shining very brightly, coming from our left to our right across the Skywatch field at ECETI Ranch. And this was about midnight on a Friday night. And all of a sudden, this craft starts flaring up. It's bright to begin with, and it's just like flaring up so brightly that it's almost like a flash flare coming out and then going back down. Did that 4 times. When it got right in front of us at about a 90-degree angle, actually maybe a 70-degree angle in front of our equipment, it actually did a laser flash right into our cameras, which we caught on tape. It's just very astronomical to see. It's almost as if someone was trying to get us a message or at least get our attention. Our batteries on our cameras immediately die when something like that happens.
I've always heard that.
Yeah, it's just fantastic. Matter of fact, we've got a guy named Lee Strauss on our team who has now figured out a Faraday cage fabric to put around our batteries so that we can prevent that, from that point. But also we had, during that same expedition, a Bigfoot cast just days before we got to the ECETI Ranch of juvenile Bigfoot with about a 15 inch long Bigfoot cast that we got to see. And we heard, then after that, we went to Takalak Lake, which is on the other side of the mountain, and experienced these magnetic anomalies that were just amazing. The idea being that when we had different compasses, about 4 of them around our campsite, all of them pointed in a different direction, being north, being in a different direction. We had some Bigfoot activity that night with stick breaks and wood knocks around our campsite at the edge of the lake, Takalak Lake. And also during our sky watches at night, we had a group that actually climbed the mountain. Mount Adams is about 10,000 feet tall, and they were at the very top of the mountain doing their sky watch when we were down at the lake doing our sky watch. And in the middle of the night, at the exact same time, at 3 a.m., the guys at the top of the mountain saw these lights playing at the top on the top of their tent from the sky, coming down, just kind of blasting their tent out with some kind of a light source. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, our time, all of our batteries on our cars, our vehicles died. Like 3 of them
Hmm.
just died in the middle of the night, including my CPAP machine, Martin, that I
Oh.
sleep with at night.
Yeah, for snoring.
That re-
Yeah, I've heard about those.
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, I've had that for my whole life, and I sleep with that when I have a battery power system, which I did that night. But the idea being is that we have some missing time reported as well, because my CPAP machine only registered an hour and 50 minutes worth of use that night because of some kind of anomaly that happened. Either the battery died or whatever, but I didn't wake up in the morning with a scratchy throat like I normally would if I didn't use my CPAP machine. So the Mount Adams incident was just multiple versions of paranormal activity, all in one section of August, basically 27th, 2018.
And did I just hear X-Files music a minute ago?
It was, my phone was going off.
Okay.
I got the X-Files ringtone. Sorry about that.
That's all right. You can put that on silent if you would, just in case that. Yeah.
I did.
So, thank you. And has a lot of other people commented about that area? I mean, is it a hot spot more or less for different things?
It's a hot spot. James Gilliland has owned the ECETI Ranch for over 30 years.
Oh, and this
and
is in the ECETI Ranch is there. I see.
It's there at Mount Adams. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. We typically make expedition. We're going down there next month, the UFOI team, to do a follow-up on our investigations down there because we've got brand new gear. We've got large telescopes now. We've got a gentleman named Dave Mason on the UFOI team who has invented a pair of binoculars that turns light sources into sound. So if you're looking at a commercial airplane, it will translate to a specific sound that you can tell that's a commercial airplane. If you're looking at an anomalous craft, it'll have an anomalous sound that we can determine is not terrestrial. Now, here's the kicker, Martin. You're going to love this. We have the ability with Dave Mason's binoculars that he's invented to send that same frequency of sound back to the source that's sending it. So if we're seeing an anomalous object, we're going to bring that to Mount Adams, and we're going to broadcast right back to the UFO, if that's what it is, their own frequency that they are using to send their light source to us. Because the theory being that communication is what they use with light sources. It's not necessarily, any, kind of radio frequency or whatever like that. We think that they're communicating with light sources, hence that giant flash that we recorded on tape at ECETI Ranch as well from that one object.
Wow. Stephen Hawking would suggest you don't do that, I bet.
Yeah,
always says don't
we've
send
thought of
anything
that, The whole idea, well, here's the deal. They already know we're there. So
Yeah.
if they wanted to wipe us out, they could do that very easily a long time ago, especially at ECETI Ranch, since we were blasted with that flash. So all we're doing is basically showing them, whoever they are, hey, we see you. We're sending your signal right back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's a CE5 scenario. Hopefully, human initiated contact, with extraterrestrials. We're attempting that.
Yeah. Well, there's been, I'm sure there's a number of cases where people have, shown a flashlight up. The Father Gill case. There's the
Yes.
Allagash incident, and I remember speaking with Foltz about that, and I said, "Why did you shine the flashlight up at it?" And then everything, how that went, not so well.
Yeah.
And speaking of not so well, what do you, if you actually think that these are aliens that are actually visiting, or at least some of them are, what do you think their purpose is? What do you think their agenda is?
That's a good question. You would think that if their agenda is to get rid of our civilization and take over the planet for their own purposes, resources, or whatever, you would think they wouldn't have waited for us to develop the atomic weapons that we have. They could have done that quite a while ago. As a matter of fact, we've got, eons and eons worth of testimony from various civilizations, the Egyptians and the Sumerians, that the Anunnaki have been here on the planet and been, interacting with our species for many, many years, maybe from the very beginning of life on the planet. So you wonder what the agenda could be, other than the fact that potentially they are, if there is a federation of planets out there or whatever, they are hoping that we are going to join them off the planet in a peaceful manner. Maybe that's why they're shutting down some of our nukes. You know, the military officers are reporting and those kinds of things. I'm hoping that it's going to be a positive, outcome for us. And indeed, the basic, consciousness level of the planet is very quickly rising above what we used to be. I know I've got 4 adult children myself, and they're total different human beings than I ever was, and are pretty much very comfortable with the idea of extraterrestrial life and our interaction in space with them.
One of the things I've brought up a couple of times on this is when you're framing it like that, you're actually framing it in a way that they would think like us, or possibly have some attributes that we have. I personally think that we have no idea of an agenda or how they could possibly think. Just think of the differences of how an intelligence can, evolve. So I don't know. I don't know if that's, I do know that, I've had a listener make a really good point in the chat room a little while back. If they're trying to hide from us, why do they have lights? I remember he posted that, and it's so true. So
good point.
Yeah, and so I think, whatever it is, whoever it is actually letting us know that they're here. But why? Why? Yeah. If there's life on so many planets out there, why are they coming here? And are they going there as well? There's so many questions we have, really.
Yeah, and in reality, you wonder. The whole idea of why now? Why are we seeing such a rise in activity? Peter Davenport from the National UFO Reporting Center says that sightings are going through the roof right now. Of course, that might have something to do with the unidentified television series, and the Project Blue Book, and all the mainstream media now jumping on board.
Yeah.
But then again, you go to the bottom line of why did the mainstream media get green-lighted to do this just recently? So it's very possible that something major is about to happen. Either that or something major has already happened, and the powers that be need to get ahead of the spin. That's one thing. There's just no explanation of why, of all this slow, dripping disclosure over the 72 years from, Roswell, New Mexico. Why so quickly now that it's happening? That's a fascinating subject for me to ponder.
Yeah. I remember I interviewed Stan Friedman right after that December 16th, 2017 New York Times article came out, and he said, his big question was, why now? Why is it now? Why are they admitting it now? That type of thing. And it could be, there are people that are speculating that it's just more disinformation, doesn't mean anything. People are, speculating that Lou Elizondo himself is a disinformation agent. I'm sure you've heard that, kicked around a lot. He's heard it enough himself. And I don't know, it'll be another thing. We'll see in another while what is going to happen. Looks like we have a caller calling in. I'll take that now. Caller, your first name, where are you calling from?
My first name is Chantel, and I'm calling from Ohio.
Hi there. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've never called into a show before, but I'm hearing you talk about why now, why is all this coming out. I heard it was from someone from the Denton Report. It was the person who has that show, and I hadn't heard of that before, and I can't even remember what show it was on. She was discussing that 3 different channelers, who she said were very knowledgeable, had said that they had been told by whoever was speaking to them, whatever entity, alien or whatever, that there is a time frame and the time is fast approaching. She said it varied between 2020 and 2025, and then one was like 2030. They will be revealed, but she said it was they said if we don't get our act together to protect ourselves, that we would have a very horrible end. And she said it's horrible, and she didn't want to discuss it.
Interesting.
So I don't. Yes, it doesn't sound good, and I mean I know some say they're all friendly and they're all good. Well, it's just like us. We're not all friendly. We're not all good, and so. Anyways, that's why she said this is being stepped up, because they're trying to get us conscious of what is going to go on, and that we need to more or less band together and straighten up our act and start working with good ones. So, anyway, just
Well,
a thought.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting if any of that could be verified, and
Yes.
and I also think as a species, if there's money is involved, we're not going to change anything.
Oh, no.
We'll lose our
never,
environment.
never.
It doesn't matter if money's involved. Money seems to rule.
Yeah.
So the aliens got to start paying
Yeah.
us to get our act together. I think that's it.
Well, yeah. It was. She has her own radio show, I guess, or internet show, the Denton Report. I want to say Lori Denton. I'd never heard of her before, but she was very knowledgeable. And then I saw her in something else right after that, so it was really.
Oh no, I believe you're talking, Chantel. You're probably talking about Lorian Fenton.
Denton, that's right. I'm horrible with names. Yes.
Yeah, she's a
Yes.
great friend of mine and a good talk show hostess.
Oh,
she also puts on major UFO conferences herself. So you ought to continue following Lorian.
I will have to, because I had never heard of her before. This was a couple weeks ago, and it was pretty chilling to hear her talk about that. So, but anyways, I just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on that thought at all, Michael?
Well, I think Chantel is very perceptive in that regard. I mean, there are indeed reasons why now would be very important. Either there's going to be some major, problem with the powers that be losing control, because there's maybe going to be outright contact coming down the line, or there could be that negative aspect of this entire thing that we need to prepare for to survive. So there's two kind of thoughts on that whole thing, and I think it's good to be discerning on both of this. I think that's why Martin's show is such a great opportunity for people to talk about these subjects, because you don't always want to go one side or the other when you get information.
Right.
You want to be discerning.
True.
Hey.
Yeah. It's just a very interesting subject, and there's so many different facets of it. So you could go on forever.
Yeah, that's right. That's what keeps me going. Thanks for the call, Chantel.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right, so we do have the line open for just about another 5 or probably not 10 minutes, another 5 minutes or so. If anyone wants to call in, that number is 603-967-4030. It's a show number only. I get calls all the time. So if anyone wants to call in, they're welcome to. I'm not sure about the agenda thing. I mean, maybe that is part of it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know why the government felt like if they are the ones that disclosed, this ATIP thing and all that. There's so much controversy about it. I don't really know. I mean, it's a big puzzle, but it certainly has changed the dialect out there. I mean, for people to be able to talk about this subject a lot more freely, and I guess that's thanks to all the people involved.
As a matter of fact, when the World UFO Day happened just recently, this was the first time that I had gotten contacted by the mainstream media to give some small little, snippet reports on mainstream Seattle news anyway, about the whole idea of a World UFO Day. Everybody's catching on to this subject right now. They find that the New York Times is coming out, Portico is coming out, and, Washington Post, and then of course all the mainstream television series are happening. So it's almost like the stigma is going away now.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if this is something that may fade, or When I've spoken a number of times to by email to both Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal. They had part in that New York Times story, and they said basically be patient. More is coming. Just be patient. They've both been on the show a number of times, and Leslie wants to lay low for some reason now. Doesn't want to be on at least my show. Maybe others, I'm not sure. But same thing with Ralph. They said, we have to be very careful with what we're doing. So it's interesting, but puzzling at the same time. What more could be coming out? Is there more to be revealed?
No, I've heard that same thing, Martin, that there are things coming down the road. I remember, a few months back where Tom DeLonge was saying the same thing.
Yes.
He initially came out with a big push, and then he kind of held himself back, and he said he really can't say anything. And then all of a sudden, the ATIP program hit big, and the unidentified television series came on, and they really started to push again. So I've heard that same thing from serious ufologists and insiders, that there's something coming down the road. It's not going to happen very quickly, but it won't be very long as well. That would kind of show you why they are doing this program of quick disclosure at this point. It's almost confirmation of certain issues so that people will not be totally caught off guard when the paradigm shift is happening.
Right. And, it's hard to know also if we may discover within so many years, I think it's very possible we may discover intelligent life on our own, without just, like a UFO landing and someone coming out on the White House lawn, that type of thing. But we may discover, as our technology grows, we may have a way of actually finding this. I'm not sure exactly what the James Webb telescope will have as far as capabilities, but I know it's pretty interesting. It's going to be a lot more than what we've had up there. And, as it goes, Kepler did a wonderful thing, I think. And so as far as us finding intelligent life, or at least life, the possibilities are growing stronger every day. So I think if there is a transition, like if tomorrow, someone did land on the White House lawn, why they ever would, I have no idea. But just to say that if something like that happened, I don't think it would be a big shock anymore. It really has changed in just a short time.
Yeah, there are at least two different X factors involved in that regard. The one you just mentioned, the fact that we have new technology just on the brink to bring us new information. That's exactly what happened with the Spy 1 radar satellites, or radar system on the Nimitz. That revealed to us things that were probably going on for a long time with these Tic Tac UFOs. And now if we're having new technology as far as our abilities to look out into space and confirm things, that's going to be the next thing. The other X factor that we haven't even discussed yet is that what if the ETs themselves, if they exist, have given an ultimatum that this is going to happen one way or another. Either you do it yourself, the planet Earth, the powers that be, or we will do it for you. That would kind of correspond with what's going on with the shutting down of the nukes, around, the military bases, the fact that, we have had a difficult time getting back to the moon, for instance, and all those kinds of things. Maybe the ETs now are going to do something themselves.
Right. Yes, that is awful puzzling, isn't it? How come we never went back to the moon when you think of our capabilities? And we're coming right up. I think the anniversary, the 50th anniversary, actually is coming up before my next show. It's I think was it the July 21st? Do you happen to remember? That's the date?
Yeah. 1969. You got it.
I hate to say this, but I remember that day. It's 50 years ago. It's amazing. I hitchhiked to where my parents were staying, and it was the first time I ever hitchhiked, and it was really pretty daring. I think it was like 100 miles away I had to go. And I remember walking in and seeing in a black and white TV when Neil Armstrong actually stepped on the moon. I remember that. That's something you never forget.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. It's amazing that we accomplished that, and we had a 10-year window to do that, and we actually did it. And there are a lot of people, maybe some that listen to the show, that say no, we never went to the moon. I really think there's plenty of evidence to say that we actually did go there, and there's been a lot of great people that actually stepped on the moon. I can't imagine what that's like. And
yeah, that would have been very amazing. That's for sure. I do kind of have a hybrid, view on that whole thing. I believe we probably did go to the moon, but I don't know that we went there in 1969. That's kind of pretty much a push when you're talking about the idea that we could barely get a guy into orbit in 1963. John Glenn finally went up in 62 and stuff, and then all of a sudden, 7 years later, we're on the moon. That's a fascinating time frame for me. But then again, you never know. We were pretty hot shot back then too.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they never knew if they were going to come back alive or ever make it back too. Thank you so much. We're out of time. It's been a real pleasure. All right.
My pleasure. Martin,
All right.
Thank you.
Sure thing. You take care. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. Thank you so much. And next week, we will be either back with Nancy and Bill Burns, or we're going to be back with Bruce Maccabee. It's kind of a long story, but it'll be either or. No, it'll be either guest. Anyway, thanks so much for listening to the show, and thanks so much for everyone that helps out. Our guest, Michael Hall, Alejandro Rojas, and other people behind the scenes. And we'll see you next week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky.
Thank you.